I am 31 years old, and I work as a night security guard at an industrial warehouse in rural Nevada, about 40 minutes from the nearest city. It's the kind of place surrounded by tall fences with barbed wire on top, and only one main entrance gate, controlled by an electronic system inside the guard booth. I took this shift because it pays a bit better, and most of the time it's extremely quiet. During the night, almost no one passes by on the road, and inside the warehouse there are no employees, just goods stored in large, empty buildings. My routine is simple. I stay in the booth monitoring the cameras, do a quick patrol on foot at the beginning of the shift, and then just watch the system until sunrise. After a few weeks there, you start to memorize every sound of the place, every creak of the metal structure when the wind hits, every blind spot in the cameras. That night, everything was normal. It was around 3 a.m., that time when your body starts to feel heavy and the silence feels more intense than usual. I was sitting, watching the screens, switching between the external and internal cameras of the warehouses, when the system gave a short alert sound, the standard notification for a gate event. At first, I thought it was some kind of error, or maybe a lost truck driver trying to get in, which sometimes happens, but when I looked at the camera for the main gate, there was absolutely no one outside. No car, no headlights in the distance, nothing. Even so, the system log clearly showed gate opened 03:07 a.m. And the strangest part, it indicated that the gate had been opened for a few seconds and then closed on its own. I found it odd immediately, but I still tried to rationalize it. I thought it could be some kind of system glitch because it had given false alerts before when the signal fluctuated. Even so, I rewound the footage a few seconds and watched carefully. The gate had actually moved slightly, just a few centimeters, as if it had unlocked and started to open but didn't fully open. There was no one forcing it from outside, no shadow, nothing passing in front of the camera. And the strangest part was that in this kind of system, the gate doesn't open by itself. It only responds to a command, either from the internal panel or from the remote we use in the booth. I even looked at the remote in my hand as if checking whether I had pressed it without realizing, but it was on the table, far from me. That's when I decided to open the more detailed system history. There's a record that shows where the command came from, and that usually helps identify whether it was someone in the booth, a remote control, or the internal panel. When I pulled up that information, I felt a discomfort immediately, like a cold drop in my stomach. The command didn't come from the booth, nor from any authorized remote. It showed as coming from the internal panel of the main warehouse. That panel is inside near the access door, and is only used during the day when there's loading activity. At that hour, there was absolutely no one inside. I had done the patrol at the beginning of the shift, checked all doors, locks, and lights. Everything was closed and empty. At that moment, I stared at the screen for a few seconds, trying to find a simple explanation that didn't involve someone being inside. I thought about a short circuit, an electrical failure, some kind of interference. But none of that made much sense because the system is very basic. It's not connected to the internet. There's no way for someone to access it from outside. Even so, I didn't want to jump straight to the conclusion that there was someone inside the warehouse. I zoomed in on the internal camera of the main warehouse and started observing more closely. It was a huge space full of stacked pallets, narrow corridors between them, and dim lighting. Those industrial lamps that make everything look slightly yellow. I couldn't see any movement, but I also couldn't see everything clearly because of the shadows between the stacks. I spent a few minutes switching between cameras, trying to find anything unusual. That's when I noticed something that bothered me more than the gate alert. On one of the internal cameras at the back of the warehouse, there was an area where the light seemed dimmer than usual, as if something was partially blocking it. At first, I thought it was just an impression, maybe a poorly positioned pallet, but it didn't match what I had seen earlier during the patrol. I clearly remembered that specific corridor because it was near a side door I always check. And at that moment, it looked like something was different there. Not direct movement, not someone passing. More like something occupying space where there hadn't been anything before. I kept watching that camera longer than I should have, trying to convince myself it was just lighting or angle. But the more I looked, the more it felt like it hadn't been there before. You couldn't clearly see a person, but it wasn't just a normal shadow either. It was like there was some kind of volume there, standing between two pallets. I thought about zooming in, but the camera quality didn't help. It just got grainy and worse. Even so, something was wrong. That's when I felt that shift in my body, you know? That tension that doesn't come from a scare but from realizing something doesn't add up. The silence inside the booth felt heavier, and I started noticing even my own breathing slightly uneven. I still tried to follow protocol and treat it like a technical issue. I grabbed the radio and called Central, but since it was the middle of the night, no one answered right away, just a standby shift that sometimes takes a while. So I thought about doing a second patrol to check in person, but just imagining entering that warehouse at that moment gave me a bad feeling, the kind you can't really explain. Even so, I couldn't ignore a possible internal access to the gate system. Before leaving the booth, I decided to check the log one more time, and that's when the system updated on its own. A new record appeared, gate control accessed, 03:14 a.m. This time it wasn't opening, just access to the panel, and again, from the same point inside the warehouse. The moment that second log appeared, I felt a stronger pressure in my chest, the kind that hits before you even understand why. It wasn't just a single alert anymore. It felt like someone was interacting with the system in real time. I stared at the screen, almost waiting for another command, like expecting confirmation that it would stop. But nothing happened for a few seconds. That's when I quickly went back to the camera showing the corridor where I had seen that strange shadow. And this time, even with the poor quality, I had the clear impression that it had changed position. It wasn't movement I saw happening. It was more like realizing it wasn't exactly where it had been before. That gave me a much more direct discomfort, because it was no longer something I could blame on lighting. I stood there unsure whether to leave the booth or not. The rule is clear. Any suspicious activity must be checked. But there's also an unwritten rule everyone in this job understands. If something doesn't make sense, you don't go in alone without backup. The problem is that backup in that area takes a long time. While I was thinking about it, another detail caught my attention. The side external camera, which shows part of the wall and a section of the warehouse from outside, displayed a slight change in light, as if some internal illumination had been blocked for a moment. I increased the brightness of the screen and tried to see better, and that's when I noticed something even worse. The side door of the warehouse, near the one I was absolutely sure had been locked during my patrol, looked slightly open. The moment I noticed the door like that, my body froze for a few seconds. It wasn't immediate fear. It was more that feeling that something had completely slipped out of control. I clearly remembered pulling the handle and checking the lock earlier. That door had no reason to be open. I switched to a better camera angle and zoomed in as much as possible. The image got worse, full of noise, but it was clear it wasn't fully closed. It wasn't the wind. That door is heavy metal. It doesn't open like that on its own. And even if it did, it would have made noise, and I hadn't heard anything from outside. The entire facility felt too quiet, as if sound was being muffled. I stood there for a few seconds trying to decide what to do, looking from the monitor to the booth door and back to the cameras. In the end, I knew I couldn't ignore it. I grabbed the flashlight, the radio, and went outside. As soon as I opened the booth door, the night air hit my face, dry, cold, that typical desert night chill. Outside, everything looked too normal. Clear sky, no lights in the distance, no sound of cars on the road. Just the faint sound of wind hitting the fences. I started walking toward the warehouse with that automatic caution, trying not to make noise even though I didn't know exactly why. Each step sounded louder than usual on the gravel, and I had the constant feeling that someone was watching me from somewhere I couldn't see. As I got closer to the warehouse, that feeling only got worse. The side door was indeed open a few centimeters, just enough for a thin strip of light to escape from inside. That alone didn't make sense because that area shouldn't have been lit at that hour. The lights stay off overnight to save energy. I stopped a few meters from the door and listened. At first I heard nothing but the wind, but after a few seconds I started to notice a very faint, irregular sound, like something being touched or dragged slowly inside. It wasn't continuous, it wasn't loud, but it was there. That's when I thought about going back to the booth and waiting for backup. But at the same time, something had already accessed the gate system. If it was someone, they could leave at any moment. I moved closer and pushed the door gently with my fingertips, trying to make as little noise as possible. As the opening widened, the smell inside caught my attention. Dust mixed with wood and something slightly metallic, but stronger than usual, like the air had been still for too long. The light inside was dim, just a few lamps on in the distance, leaving most of the warehouse in shadow. I stepped inside, and the first thing I did was point the flashlight toward the corridor where I had seen that shadow on the camera. At first I didn't see anything unusual, just pallets and stacked boxes. But the silence inside was different. Not the absence of sound, but as if any noise was absorbed before reaching me. I took a few more steps in, trying to keep my breathing controlled, but already feeling my heart racing in a way I couldn't hide. The flashlight only illuminated what was directly in front of me, and everything else was too dark to rely on peripheral vision. When I reached the corridor where I had seen that strange shape on the camera, I stopped. At first glance, everything looked normal. Pallets in place, boxes stacked, nothing clearly out of place. But still, something was wrong. I started paying closer attention to the ground. And that's when I noticed faint drag marks, as if something heavy had been moved recently. They weren't deep, but they were there, crossing the corridor and leading toward the area where the internal gate panel was located. I followed those marks with the flashlight slowly, trying not to make noise. The closer I got to the panel, the stronger the feeling that I wasn't alone became. It wasn't a clear sound, not visible movement, just that strange sense of presence hard to explain. When I turned the last corner and illuminated the wall where the panel was, my entire body locked up. The panel cover was open. That cover is normally closed with a simple latch, but it doesn't open by itself. And at that moment, it was wide open, with the buttons exposed. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to process, and then my flashlight moved slightly downward. That's when I noticed the gate control button was still slightly pressed, as if someone had just released it. At that moment, I felt a strong physical reaction, like a cold sensation rising up the back of my neck and down my spine. I stood there, unsure whether to take another step or leave immediately. I knew that couldn't be coincidence. Someone had touched it, and not even seconds ago. I raised the flashlight again, scanning the area around the panel, sweeping the beam across nearby corridors, expecting to see someone hiding, or at least some clear sign of movement. But there was nothing. Just that strange, heavy silence and the sound of my own heartbeat too loud in my ears. I started moving sideways slowly, without fully turning my back to the panel as if that would make any difference. That's when I heard a sound behind me. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. Something lightly hitting metal followed by a dull sound like a box being adjusted. I turned the flashlight toward the sound too quickly, almost stumbling. The light hit an empty corridor, but one of the boxes there was still moving slightly as if it had just been touched. There was no one visible, no obvious place for someone to hide in that specific spot, and the worst part wasn't even the sound itself. It was the fact that it happened right after I looked at the panel, as if whoever was there knew exactly where I was and was moving just outside my field of vision. At that point, I didn't try to understand anymore. I stepped back slowly for a few seconds and then turned completely, walking faster until I got out of the warehouse. Once outside, I closed the door as much as I could without making noise and went straight back to the booth. As soon as I got in, I locked the door and stared at the cameras, trying to find anything. The corridor where the box had moved was empty again. The panel appeared closed as if it had never been opened, and no new logs appeared in the system after that. I spent the rest of the night there without going out again, just waiting for daylight. When the next shift arrived, I explained what had happened, but no one found anything out of place. To this day, it has never had an explanation. And what bothers me the most isn't that the gate opened. It's knowing that the command came from inside, and that for some reason it felt like someone was there with me the entire time, avoiding being seen. Story 2. I am 34 years old, and I work as a security guard at a truck parking lot in rural Texas, in a somewhat isolated area near a long highway that crosses several small towns. It's not a sophisticated place. Basically a large dirt yard surrounded by a simple fence with a guard booth at the entrance where we control who comes in and out. There's no automatic system or anything modern. Everything is done manually. Every truck that arrives, I write it down in the logbook. Time, license plate, driver's name, and reason for stopping. I took the night shift because it pays a bit more, and most nights it's pretty quiet. The traffic is low. A few truck drivers stop to rest, refuel, or wait for daylight before continuing their trip. Other than that, it's just silence and the constant sound of engines in the distance on the highway. That night I arrived around 11:50 p.m., a few minutes before taking over the shift. The guy from the previous shift was already leaving, gave me the usual rundown. Nothing out of the ordinary, just a few vehicles that night. As soon as he left, I went into the booth, sat down and pulled the logbook to check the latest entries. It's a simple notebook already worn out with several pages filled out by hand. I always make a habit of looking at it before starting, just to understand the pattern of the night. That's when I saw something that made me stop for a few seconds. In the middle of the page, right below the last entry from the previous shift, there were 3 entries written in my handwriting. Not similar, exactly the same. The way I write the letter R, the spacing, even the pressure of the pen on the paper. And the strangest part, the times written were all in the future, about 20 to 30 minutes ahead. At first, I thought it was some kind of joke or that I had written it myself earlier and just didn't remember. But that didn't make sense because I had just arrived, and the notebook always stays in the booth. No one besides the guard on duty handles it. Even so, I tried to stay calm and analyze it as if it were something simple. I looked at the entries more carefully. There was one scheduled for 0017, a truck with a partially written plate number, the driver's name, and a short note. Then another at 0026, and one more at 0034. Everything was written in the same way I usually organize things, even abbreviations I use without thinking. What bothered me the most wasn't even that. It was that the writing looked fresh, as if it had been written just minutes earlier. I stared at it for a while, lightly running my finger over the ink to see if it was really recent. It didn't smear, but it also didn't look old like the rest of the page. I even flipped through a few pages to check if anything similar had happened before, but everything else looked normal. I went back to the page and started reading the vehicle details more carefully. Partial plates, models, colors, nothing impossible, all plausible for that area. That's when I looked at the clock on the wall and realized there were still a few minutes before the first scheduled time. I thought about just ignoring it and continuing my shift normally, but I already had that uneasy feeling, that constant doubt. So I left the notebook open on the page and kept watching the cameras in the entrance, kind of waiting to see if any of it would actually happen. It turned U017 and for a few seconds nothing happened. I even felt a bit relieved, ready to conclude it was just some confusion. But then, a few seconds after the time passed, I saw the headlights of a truck approaching from the road. That immediately made me tense again. The vehicle entered slowly through the gate exactly as it normally happens. I grabbed the flashlight, stepped out of the booth, and went to the side window to log the entry, trying to act as usual. When the truck stopped and the driver rolled down the window, I felt my stomach drop slightly. The plate matched what was written in the notebook, even the partial numbers. The name he gave was also the same one written there. I wrote everything down again almost automatically, but my mind was already completely focused on what I had seen before. When the truck entered and moved into the yard, I went back to the booth and straight to the notebook. The entry I had just made was right below the one that had already been written earlier, with practically the same information, duplicated. At that point, there was no way it was coincidence. I started feeling that pressure in my chest, a strange anxiety because I couldn't understand where that had come from. I looked at the clock again, waiting for the next time.
And that's exactly what happened.
At 0026, another truck showed up with the same details that had been written down. Everything repeated the same way. At that point, I wasn't even trying to explain anymore. I was just waiting for the next one to happen, with that constant feeling that something much bigger was wrong. When the second truck entered and I confirmed everything matched again, I started feeling really uncomfortable. It wasn't coincidence anymore. It wasn't an error. I sat in the booth looking at the open notebook, then at the gate, then at the clock, as if I were waiting for something to go wrong in the middle of it all. My body was already on alert, even without knowing exactly why. The silence between one arrival and the next felt heavier, as if time itself was taking longer to pass. I started noticing things I would normally ignore, like the sound of the wind hitting the fence, the creaking of the booth wood, the distant sound of trucks on the highway. Everything felt sharper, like I was trying to anticipate anything out of the ordinary. When 0034 approached, I was practically expecting the third truck to show up.
And that's exactly what happened.
Headlights on the road, slow entry, stopping at the same spot. I went to the window, already knowing what I would find. The plate matched what was in the notebook, the model too. But this time, when the driver spoke to me, I felt something different. He seemed tired, normal for someone at that hour. But there was something in the way he spoke, as if he was paying too much attention to me. It wasn't hostile, not direct, but it gave off a strange feeling, hard to explain. I made the entry as usual and let him in. But when I went back to the booth, I didn't go straight to the cameras. I went straight to the notebook because there was still one thing I hadn't really faced. I took a deep breath before looking at the bottom of the page. Until then, I had avoided reading the last line carefully, almost on purpose. But at that point, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I slowly moved my eyes down to the end of the page. And there it was. The same handwriting, the same style, no doubt about it. But unlike the other entries, it wasn't a log entry. It was a simple, short sentence written without any abbreviations. Don't get out of the car when he asks for help. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to understand what it meant. There was no time, no plate, no context. Just that sentence, written like a direct warning. At first I thought it might be some kind of bad joke, someone trying to scare me. But it didn't make sense. No one besides me and the previous guard had access to the notebook, and he wouldn't be able to imitate my handwriting that precisely. And even if he could, how would he get the 3 previous entries so accurate? I closed the notebook for a few seconds and just sat there, staring at nothing, trying to organize my thoughts. The feeling now wasn't just strangeness. It was alertness, like I was about to deal with something I didn't understand. I looked at the clock. There were no more scheduled entries after the last truck. But that sentence was there for a reason. I tried to go back to normal, but I couldn't ignore it. I sat watching the cameras, but my mind kept going back to that sentence. I even thought about calling someone, but what would I say? That the notebook was predicting trucks? It didn't even make sense to me. The yard was quiet again. The 3 trucks already parked, everything seemingly normal. Then a few minutes later, I saw movement on one of the internal cameras. One of the trucks that had just arrived had its driver's door open. I hadn't seen him get out on camera before, which was already strange because the angle usually catches that. I zoomed in and tried to focus better. I couldn't see the driver clearly, just his silhouette stepping down and walking around the front of the truck. He walked slowly, unhurried, like someone tired. Up to that point, nothing unusual. Many drivers get out to stretch or check something on the vehicle. The problem was the path he started taking. Instead of going to the common area or staying near the truck, he started walking straight toward the booth. I felt that tension return immediately. There was nothing technically wrong with that. Drivers sometimes come to ask for information, use the bathroom, or ask something. But with everything that had happened, it didn't feel normal anymore. I watched him approaching through the cameras before even looking out the window. The way he walked was too slow, almost dragging but steady, without stopping at any moment. He didn't look around, didn't check his phone, didn't seem distracted by anything. It was as if he had been heading straight for the booth from the moment he got out of the truck. When he left the camera's view, the tension increased even more because I knew he was close enough to appear in front of me at any moment. I looked at the open notebook on the table, and the sentence felt heavier now than before. A few seconds later, I heard 2 light knocks on the booth window. Nothing aggressive, nothing urgent, just a simple tap, like someone asking for attention. I slowly lifted my eyes and saw his face on the other side of the glass. The outside light hit from the side, so I couldn't see all the details clearly, but I could tell he was staring directly at me, with no expression at all. I opened the window just a crack, enough to hear him. He spoke in a low, tired voice, asking if I could step outside for a minute to help him with something on the truck, saying he had a problem and needed someone to take a look. At that moment, the sentence from the notebook came straight into my mind. It wasn't even a conscious thought, it was automatic. I felt my body freeze as if some part of me had already made the decision before my mind caught up. I told him I couldn't leave, that it was protocol, that he would have to handle it there or wait until morning. He didn't insist. He just kept looking at me for a few seconds longer than normal, in silence, as if expecting a different response. Then he stepped back, turned without saying anything, and started walking back to the truck the same slow way he had come. I waited a few seconds before rushing to check the cameras. When he appeared again, he was already close to the vehicle. He got in, closed the door, and stayed there. Engine off, interior lights off. He didn't get out again. I spent the rest of the night without taking my eyes off the screens. No other strange movement happened. When the morning shift arrived, I explained everything, showed the notebook. But the last line wasn't there anymore. Only the 3 normal truck entries. And to this day, what bothers me the most isn't that the notebook predicted everything. It's thinking about what might have happened if I had stepped out of the booth when he asked. Story 3. I am 29 years old and I work as a contract security guard at construction sites and empty buildings in the Chicago area. At the time this happened, I was working a night shift at an abandoned construction site on the outskirts of the city, a building about 5 stories tall that had been left unfinished due to funding issues. It was a very raw place, exposed concrete, incomplete wiring, and an elevator that had never been put into operation. I wasn't alone on that contract, and there was another guard with me, Mike, and we split the patrol so we wouldn't both have to go inside the building at the same time. While one of us did the rounds, the other stayed at the base, which was basically an improvised trailer with a monitor and a radio. Our communication was only through the radio, those simple ones with 2 preset channels, nothing sophisticated. That night, the shift started normally. I arrived around 10:30, grabbed the radio, checked the battery, we did a quick communication test, and agreed as usual. I would start the first patrol while he stayed in the trailer. The weather was cold, that kind of sharp wind that blows through the gaps in the building and makes everything echo more than usual. Before going in, I already had that slight feeling of discomfort that places like that always give you, especially at night. But after a few minutes walking around, you usually get used to it. I went up floor by floor using the flashlight, checking doors, stairwells, open windows. Everything seemed in the same condition as always, empty, silent, and somewhat unstable. Up to that point, nothing out of the ordinary. I was already on the 3rd floor when I started hearing a light static on the radio. That's relatively common in buildings like that, because of the structure and interference, so I didn't pay much attention at first. But the static didn't stop. It stayed constant for a few seconds, like someone was trying to talk, but not pressing the button properly. I stopped near one of the columns and brought the radio closer to my ear. I thought it might be Mike trying to call me. I asked on the standard channel if he needed anything. No response, just the static, and then it changed. In the middle of that noise, a voice started coming through, low, muffled, like it was coming through the wrong frequency. At first, I couldn't understand what was being said, but after a few seconds, it became clear enough to make me uncomfortable. The voice was calling my name. It wasn't loud, it wasn't urgent. It was almost in a normal tone, just distorted, like it was coming from far away. I stood still, trying to figure out if it was actually someone talking or just my brain trying to interpret the static. I asked again on the radio if it was Mike. This time he answered immediately. Said he hadn't said anything and that he could hear me clearly. At that moment, I felt my body tense up, because there was no way to write that off as normal interference anymore. I asked Mike if he had heard anything strange besides my voice, any unusual noise. He said no, that for him the radio was clean, nothing out of the ordinary. That made it worse because it meant whatever was happening was only on my end. I pulled the radio away a bit as if that would help me understand better, and stayed silent for a few seconds, just listening. The static came back stronger for a moment, and then the voice appeared again. This time I could understand it more clearly. It called my name again in the same way, but then added something else. It sounded like a request for help. It wasn't a full sentence, more like fragments of words, but the tone was clear, low, steady, unhurried. There was no panic in the voice, no urgency, which in a way made it even stranger. I felt a different kind of discomfort, not a direct scare, but that feeling that something was wrong on a level I couldn't explain. I asked Mike again if he was sure he wasn't transmitting by accident. He confirmed he wasn't, even pressed the button a few times to test with me, and his communication was normal. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to decide whether to continue the patrol or go back to the trailer. Logic said to ignore it and follow protocol, but my body wasn't cooperating anymore. Even so, I started moving again, heading toward the stairs to go up to the 4th floor. As I moved, the radio went silent for a while, until the static came back stronger, almost blowing out the sound. I brought it to my ear immediately. The voice came through again, now a little clearer, and repeated my name once more. Then it said a full phrase without cutting off this time. It asked for help. That's when I noticed something that made me even more uncomfortable. The radio was set to the standard channel, the one only Mike and I were using. There was no reason to receive a transmission from anywhere else, especially inside that building where even the electrical system barely worked. I quickly checked the channel selector to see if it had changed accidentally, but it was in the correct position. I took a deep breath and said over the radio that if there was someone inside, they needed to identify themselves. No direct response came back, just silence for a few seconds, and then that same light static as if the transmission was still open on the other side. I stood there near the stairs looking at the dark corridor, trying to decide what to do next. That's when I thought of doing something more objective, trying to locate where it was coming from. Even if it was interference, you usually notice some variation as you move through space. So I started going up to the 4th floor slowly, paying attention to the radio with each step. Halfway up the stairs, the static got a little stronger, like I was getting closer to the source. That gave me a bad feeling immediately because it didn't seem random anymore. When I reached the 4th floor, I stopped before fully entering the corridor and just listened. The radio made that light transmission click, and the voice came again, clearer than before. It called my name and this time added something different. It said it was up here. That froze me for a second. It wasn't just a generic request anymore. It sounded directed, like it knew exactly where I was. I asked Mike over the radio if he had left the trailer for any reason, if he had entered the building without telling me. He answered right away, confused, saying no, that he was still outside and hadn't done anything. At that point, I was no longer comfortable continuing upward without understanding what was happening. Even so, I took a few steps into the 4th floor, keeping the flashlight ahead and the radio pressed to my ear. The corridor was long, full of unfinished partitions and areas in shadow because of the openings in the walls. As I walked, the static on the radio increased and decreased like I was really getting closer to something. That gave me a clear direction. The signal seemed stronger at the far end of the corridor where the access to the top floor would be. The problem was that that floor technically had no active power anywhere, not even finished wiring. I kept walking slowly until I reached the stairs leading to the 5th floor. That's when the radio clicked again. But this time the transmission stayed open longer. The voice came through clearer than before with less distortion. It called my name again, and then said something that completely stopped me. It told me to come up, that it was waiting for me. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't desperate. It was almost neutral, like someone giving a simple instruction. I felt my whole body react immediately. That mix of fear and alertness, like something was clearly wrong. I didn't respond this time. I just stood there staring at the dark staircase in front of me. I stayed there for a few seconds, trying to decide whether to go up or turn back right away. Logic said not to go, but at the same time, if there really was someone inside asking for help, I couldn't just ignore it. Still, there were too many things out of the ordinary. I pressed the radio and told Mike I was going to go up just halfway into the top floor, just to check quickly. He responded immediately in a more serious tone, telling me not to do it alone and that if something was off, I should come back down and wait for backup. I knew he was right, but that feeling that something was up there didn't go away. I climbed a few steps very slowly, trying not to make noise. The staircase was completely dark, only my flashlight illuminating the concrete steps. Halfway up, the radio started hissing again, louder than before. I stopped in the middle of the stairs and brought it to my ear. The voice came again, but this time it wasn't calling from far away. It sounded closer, more direct, almost like it was on the same level as me. It called my name once more, and then went silent. A strange silence, like the transmission had been cut off midway. I stood there in the middle of the stairs for a few more seconds, trying to figure out if that had really come from the radio, or if it was already in my head. My whole body was tense, and I realized I had been holding my breath without noticing. I took one more step up and stopped again. There was no sound coming from the floor above. No movement, no different echo, just that heavy silence that seemed to get stronger the more I focused on it. That's when something finally outweighed the curiosity. I just turned around and started going down. I went down the stairs faster than I had gone up, trying to stay controlled, but already decided to get out of the building. As soon as I reached the ground floor, I didn't even stop to check anything else. I went straight to the exit and walked to the trailer. When I got in, Mike noticed immediately that something was wrong. I told him everything, from the first transmission to what I had heard on the stairs. He looked at me seriously, but without laughing or doubting. He just grabbed his radio and tested it right there. The communication was normal. No static, no voice. We decided not to go back into the building that night. We stayed monitoring only the outside until the shift ended. No other transmission happened after that. The next day, the technical team was called to check the radios and the frequency. They didn't find anything wrong, and what stayed with me the most wasn't even the voice itself. It was the fact that it seemed to know exactly where I was the entire time, and somehow it wanted me to go up. Story 4. I am 36 years old, and I work as a night security guard at a freight yard near a highway in rural Colorado. It's a relatively busy place at night, because many truck drivers use the space to stop, rest, or wait for cargo clearance. The yard is large, with several marked parking spaces and a specific area where trucks stay parked for longer periods. I stay in an elevated booth near the entrance with a direct view of a good part of the lot and a few cameras covering the more distant points. The control is somewhat mixed, part through the system, part manual, so I end up monitoring everything closely. After a few weeks working there, you start to recognize the patterns, the most common times, types of trucks, driver behavior. Almost nothing really falls outside what you expect. It was about a month into that shift that I started noticing one specific truck. It wasn't something that caught my attention right away. It showed up one night, parked in one of the farthest spaces, stayed there for a while, and then disappeared. Up to that point, normal. But a few days later, I saw what looked like the same truck coming back to the same place. And then again. The problem wasn't that it showed up. It was the feeling that there was something inconsistent about it. At first glance, it looked exactly the same. Same model, same dark color, same type of trailer. But there was always one detail that was different. Sometimes it was the position of a side light. Other times a small sticker that hadn't been there before. Or even the condition of the body. Cleaner one night, dirtier on another, with no clear pattern. At first I thought it was just coincidence because a lot of similar trucks really do pass through there. Same model, same color, same routes. None of that is rare. But over time, it started bothering me more than it should have. I began paying specific attention to that spot in the yard where it always parked. It was a more isolated space, somewhat outside the main flow, which normally was only used when the rest of the lot was fuller. But that truck would show up even when the yard was almost empty, and it always went straight to that spot as if it were the only one available. Another thing that caught my attention was the time. There was no pattern. Sometimes it appeared around midnight, other times closer to 4 in the morning. It didn't follow the common flow of the other trucks. Even so, every time I looked quickly, the impression was the same. It's the same truck. But whenever I looked more carefully, there was always something out of place. I even started writing some details on a separate sheet of paper to compare later, like the position of the lights, small marks on the side. But that only made it worse, because it never matched completely. It was too similar to be a different one, and too different to be the same. After a few days of noticing this, I started paying closer attention every time that section of the yard appeared on the cameras. There was one specific night when it got stranger. It was around 2:40 in the morning when I saw the truck enter. I hadn't seen it approaching from the road nor appearing on the exterior cameras. It was simply already inside the yard when I looked. That alone was unusual, because I normally follow every entry from the gate. Even so, it went straight to the same spot as always and parked there, like on the other nights. I grabbed the log to write down the entry, but there was nothing corresponding in the system at that time. No authorized access, no truck registered as entering. I stared at that for a few seconds, trying to understand if I had missed something on the cameras, but there was no cut or failure. I rewound the footage and reviewed a few minutes earlier, and it simply wasn't there. It was as if it had appeared inside the yard already in motion. That already put me on alert, but I still tried to stay logical. It could be a camera error, a delay in the system, some technical issue, but the feeling that something was wrong no longer went away. I kept watching the cameras for a few minutes, trying to see if there was any movement around the truck. Normally, when someone parks, you see the driver getting out, walking across the yard, going to the bathroom, or staying nearby. But this time there was nothing. The driver's door didn't open. No interior light came on. Nothing. The truck just sat there, as if it were empty. That bothered me more than the rest, because even someone tired always shows some sign of movement after parking. After about 10 minutes of watching without seeing anything, I decided to go there in person. I grabbed the flashlight and left the booth, trying to keep the routine as if it were just a normal check. The air was cold and dry, typical for that region at night, and the yard was quieter than usual at that hour. As I walked toward the truck, I started noticing the details more carefully. From far away, it looked the same as always, but when I got closer, I noticed the side was cleaner than on the other nights, almost without any dust at all, which didn't make sense for a vehicle that drove that road so much. I approached slowly, shining the flashlight into the driver's cab. The first thing I did was try to see inside through the window. Normally, you can at least see someone's silhouette or some object on the seat. But there was no one. The seat was empty. There was no backpack, no bottle, nothing indicating that someone was using the truck at that moment. I got even closer, almost touching the door, and knocked lightly on the metal with my knuckles, just to see if there was any reaction. None. Not even the sound of movement inside. That's when I started feeling that bad sensation again, stronger than before. I walked around the front of the truck, shining the flashlight on the ground, trying to see if there were fresh footprints or any sign that someone had gotten out. The ground was packed dirt, so it usually marks easily, but there was nothing clear. No tracks coming from the cab, no sign of anyone walking nearby. It didn't add up. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to decide whether to open the door to check better, but something made me hesitate. It wasn't policy to mess with a client's vehicle unless necessary, and at that moment, it felt safer not to touch anything. I stood there for a few more seconds, looking at the truck as if something would change if I just waited. Nothing happened. The silence around me was strange, emptier than normal, as if even the other trucks in the yard were farther away than they really were. I took a step back, still keeping the flashlight aimed at the cab, and then decided to go back to the surveillance booth. It didn't make sense to stay there without knowing what I was looking for. As I walked away, I had the impression that the paint on the side looked a little different under the light, as if there were a mark I hadn't noticed before. But I didn't stop to check. The walk back felt longer than usual. I didn't look back once, but I had that constant feeling that there was something wrong with that truck sitting there. When I got into the booth, I went straight to the cameras. I pulled up the one that showed exactly that parking space and froze for a few seconds. The truck was no longer there. The space was empty. I stared at the screen, trying to understand if I had opened the wrong camera, but no. It was the same angle. I rewound the footage a few seconds earlier, and there was no record of it leaving. No movement, no lights, nothing. I rewound the video a few more minutes, trying to find any sign of movement. Normally, even if a truck leaves quickly, you see something. Headlights, a shadow, displacement. But there was nothing there. It was as if the truck simply wasn't there from one frame to the next. I kept watching that over and over, trying to find some detail that would explain it. I even thought it might be a camera glitch, but all the other images were normal. Nothing frozen, nothing cut. Just that one specific spot that made no sense. I quickly looked out at the yard through the booth window just to confirm. And really, the space was empty. No truck in that spot. That gave me a bad feeling, stronger than before. It wasn't just strangeness, it was that realization that I had seen something that shouldn't have been possible. I went back to the logbook and checked again. There was no entry recorded, no exit, nothing that justified it. And even so, I had just been there a few meters from the truck. After that, I didn't leave the booth again that night. I kept switching between the cameras and the direct view of the yard, trying to stay in control, but no longer really trusting what I was seeing. At some moments, I had the impression of movement in that same parking space, as if something were there again. But whenever I focused better, there was nothing. I tried to convince myself it was just fatigue, that my mind was completing patterns where none existed, but it didn't feel like only that. The rest of the shift passed slowly, with that constant feeling of alert. No other strange truck appeared. Everything else stayed within the usual pattern. When the morning shift arrived, I explained what had happened and showed the footage. No one could explain it. They said it could be a glitch, a logging error, some technical issue. But what stayed with me wasn't even the disappearance. It was the certainty that every time that truck appeared, it was never exactly the same. And that night, for the first time, I got close enough to realize there was no one inside it. Story 5. I am 33 years old and I work as a night security guard in a corporate building in the Atlanta area. It's one of those standard office buildings, multiple floors, commercial rooms, long hallways, and automatic lighting in some areas. At night, the building is completely empty. Just me on shift, responsible for monitoring the cameras and doing periodic rounds every hour. The routine is always the same. I start on the ground floor, go through the main rooms, go up floor by floor, checking doors, lights, windows, and then return to the control room to log everything. After a while, It becomes automatic. You walk the same route so many times that you're basically on autopilot, only paying attention when something breaks the pattern. That night started normally. I began the round shortly after midnight, following exactly the usual route. I checked the ground floor, everything closed, lights off, nothing out of place. I went up to the second floor, passed through the first rooms, and closed a few doors that were left ajar. Something common when employees forget at the end of the day. I always make a point to close them properly, pull the handle, test it because it's part of the protocol. After a few minutes, I moved toward the side corridor on that same floor, which leads to some smaller rooms. That's when I felt that something was wrong, but at first I couldn't identify exactly what. I stopped in the middle of the hallway, trying to understand what had caught my attention. That's when I looked again at one of the doors I had just closed a few minutes earlier. It was open. Not wide open, but clearly unlocked with the gap visible. At first I thought maybe I hadn't closed it properly, which can happen when you're on autopilot. I went back to it, pushed it shut, tested the handle. This time I closed it even more carefully. I kept walking, trying not to give it too much importance, but already with that slight feeling of discomfort. A few meters ahead, something else caught my attention. A room I hadn't yet visited on that round but had its light on. That made me stop again. I had passed there at the start of the shift, before beginning the round, and everything had been off. There was no reason for that room to be lit now, especially with no one in the building. I approached slowly, looked through the glass before entering. The room was empty, chairs in place, nothing disturbed. Still, the light was on. I went in, turned off the switch, and stood there for a few seconds in silence, trying to hear anything unusual. When I left the room, I was no longer on autopilot. I started paying attention to everything, every detail. The hallway felt quieter than usual, and even the sound of my own footsteps seemed different, louder. I continued the round, heading toward the other rooms on that floor, but with the constant feeling that I was slightly behind something I didn't understand. It wasn't fear yet. It was more a growing uneasiness, as if the building's pattern had changed for no reason. When I got near the staircase to go up to the third floor, I decided to quickly check an administrative room that is always locked. When I touched the door, it opened without resistance. That made me stop immediately. I was absolutely sure I had passed there minutes earlier and tested that door, and it had been closed. It wasn't the kind of door someone would accidentally leave open. I entered slowly, lighting the space with my flashlight. The room was empty, everything in place. But the chair at the main desk was slightly out of position, as if someone had just gotten up. At that point, my whole body was on alert. That wasn't just my distraction anymore. I left the room, closed the door again, and went straight to the stairs. I went up to the third floor trying to stay calm, but already thinking about cutting the round short and going back to the control room to check the cameras. When I reached the main corridor of the third floor, the first thing I noticed was another light on, in a room I hadn't visited yet that night. That repeated the same feeling as before, only stronger. I went to the door, looked through the glass, and empty again. I entered, turned off the light, checked the room. Nothing out of place. When I stepped out, I stopped in the middle of the hallway and listened. That's when I heard something very faint coming from farther down the floor. It wasn't a clear sound, but it seemed like distant movement, like a door being gently pushed closed. I pointed my flashlight in that direction and waited a few seconds. Nothing else happened. Even so, that was enough for me to decide it didn't make sense to keep walking without checking what was happening on the cameras. I turned and started heading back down to the ground floor, trying to keep a normal pace, but already with that constant feeling that something else was happening in there besides me. I went down the stairs faster than usual, trying not to make noise, but without running. When I reached the ground floor, I went straight to the control room. As soon as I entered, the first thing I did was look at the monitors. The cameras were all working normally, showing the corridors I had just walked through. At first, everything looked empty, as it should. I started switching between angles, rewinding a few minutes to review what had just happened. That's when I noticed something that made me stop immediately. On one of the second-floor cameras, someone appeared walking down the corridor. I froze for a few seconds, trying to understand what I was seeing. The person was following exactly the same route I had taken, passing the same doors, stopping at the same points. But there was one detail that made everything worse. It wasn't live. I looked at the camera system's clock. The recording was a few minutes ahead of the current time. It wasn't delayed. It was as if it was showing something that hadn't happened yet. I stared at it, trying to find a logical explanation. I thought it could be a system synchronization error, some kind of timestamp issue. But when I switched to another camera, on the third floor, the same thing was happening. The same figure walking through the corridor, entering rooms exactly where I had been minutes earlier. And the worst part wasn't just that. The movement matched what I was about to do. On one of the monitors, I saw the person stop in front of the administrative room, the same one I had found open. Then, in the recording, they pushed the door and entered. At that moment, I wasn't trying to explain anymore. I was just watching. The image wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough to see that the person had the same posture as me, the same way of walking. I couldn't see the face clearly because of the lighting, but the resemblance was enough to make me uncomfortable. I watched it continue, the figure leaving the room, moving down the corridor, heading toward the stairs. And the time on the screen was still a few minutes ahead of mine. I stood there for a few seconds without moving, just staring at the screens, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to leave immediately, go straight outside and wait for daylight. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore what I was seeing. It was as if someone was repeating exactly what I had already done. Just before it happened, I looked at the control room clock, then back at the cameras. The time on the footage was still ahead. That's when I noticed something that made me even more uneasy. On the third floor camera, the figure reached the stairs and stopped. It didn't go down right away. It stood there for a few seconds facing the corridor as if waiting for something. I watched that with the feeling that it was directly connected to me at that moment. And then, in the recording, the figure started going down. At that point, I reacted almost automatically. I turned my head toward the control room door as if expecting to hear footsteps outside. I didn't hear anything. I looked back at the screens, and the ground floor camera already showed the figure approaching the control room area. The movement was calm, steady, just like mine. My whole body locked up because the time on the screen was still a few minutes ahead. That hadn't happened yet. I didn't wait any longer. I got up from the chair, went to the control room door, and locked it from the inside. I went back to the monitors and stood there, watching, waiting to see what would happen. The figure appeared in the ground floor corridor, walking toward the door, and then stopped right in front of the camera. For a second, it seemed like it was looking directly into the lens. Then the image cut out for a moment, a quick glitch. When it came back, there was no one in the corridor anymore. I stood there, not knowing how much time had passed. When I finally worked up the courage to open the door and check, there was no one in the entire building. I finished the shift without doing any more rounds. The next day, no one found any issue with the cameras or the time records. Everything was normal. But what stayed with me was the feeling that for some reason, that night, I wasn't the only one doing that round. Story 6. I am 38 years old, and I work as a night security guard at an isolated factory in the interior of Ohio. It's one of those places far from everything, surrounded by rural land, with a narrow road that leads to the main gate. There's no side entrance, no secondary access. Anyone who comes in or out has to pass through a single control point, which is at the guard booth where I work. Everything is recorded: time, name, authorization. During the night, the factory is completely empty. No employees, no active operations, just me monitoring the cameras and the internal motion sensors. That night, the shift started like any other. I did the initial check, inspected the gate, reviewed the day's records, and settled into the control room, which is inside the main building, near the administrative corridor. The place has a basic sensor system. When something moves in certain areas, an alert shows up on the monitor. It's not very sensitive. It usually triggers from simple things like temperature changes or even a poorly positioned object. So when around 2 a.m., a motion alert appeared in a restricted area of the internal corridor, I didn't take it seriously at first. I looked at the screen expecting to see nothing unusual, like a shadow or some odd reflection. But this time it wasn't that. The camera clearly showed a person walking down the corridor. It wasn't blurry. It wasn't distorted. It was someone actually walking calmly without any rush. Right away, I felt that immediate discomfort because that simply shouldn't have been happening. There was no one authorized inside, and no one had passed through the entrance. I knew that because I had been in control the entire time. I zoomed in to try to get a better look. The person was in profile, walking toward the corridor that led to the administrative offices. I couldn't see the face clearly because of the lighting, but it was clearly an adult normal posture, walking as if they knew the place. They didn't seem lost, didn't seem like someone rushing in to break in. That was what bothered me the most. I quickly pulled up the entry log for the night, and there was absolutely nothing. No entries since the start of my shift. At that moment, I felt my whole body go on alert. It was no longer a question of system error or sensor malfunction. I was seeing someone inside the building walking calmly, as if they had every right to be there. I started switching between cameras to follow the path. The person turned into a side corridor, exactly in the direction of the areas that lead to the control room. That gave me an immediate bad feeling because it wasn't a random path. It was a direct route to where I was. I grabbed the radio and tried to call someone from the external team, but that night there was no one else on patrol in that area. It was just me. The silence of the building felt heavier at that moment. I increased the camera audio volume, trying to pick up any sound beyond the image, but nothing came through. No footsteps, no doors opening, just the image of the person walking. And the way they moved remained strange. Always at the same pace, not stopping, not looking around as if they already knew exactly where they were going. I kept tracking through the cameras, trying to predict where the person would go next. The system showed each sensor being triggered as they moved through the building, confirming that it wasn't a visual error. They were actually moving inside the factory. When they turned into another corridor, I felt a tightening in my chest because I recognized the path exactly. It was the same route that led directly to the control room. There was no detour, no other purpose in that area besides the administrative offices and my room. I stood up from the chair and stayed on my feet, looking at both the monitors and the door to the room. It was strange seeing that happen on the screens and at the same time, knowing that in a few minutes that person could be right outside. I tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe someone had been left inside the building without being logged, some employee I didn't know about, but none of that made sense. There was no way someone could enter without passing by me. And even if they had, they wouldn't be walking like that so calmly. I started mentally calculating how long it would take for them to reach my door, following their path on the cameras. Each time the view changed, they were closer. They passed through the smaller office corridor, then the archive area, always at the same pace without stopping. That's when I noticed a detail that made me even more uncomfortable. In none of the cameras did they look directly at the lens. It wasn't someone checking the environment, nor someone trying to hide. It was as if the cameras simply didn't exist for them. When they entered the last corridor before the control room, my entire body locked up. I knew that section well. There was no alternative exit. Either they would come straight to my door, or they would have to turn back the same way. I quickly checked the access door logs. No recent openings. That meant all doors were supposedly closed. And yet, on the cameras, they were simply passing through them as if they were unlocked. That didn't match anything I knew about how the building worked. I went to the control room door and checked the lock with my hand just to be sure. It was locked. I went back to the monitors and stared at the final corridor. The camera covering that angle showed them entering the frame, walking straight toward my door. At that moment, my body was completely tense, as if I were bracing for impact. I glanced quickly at the clock on the wall, then back at the screen. The distance between them and the door was shrinking every second. That's when something happened that confused me even more. On the camera, they reached the door and simply stopped. They didn't try to open it, didn't make any movement. They just stood there facing the door. I stared at it, barely breathing, waiting for any reaction, but nothing happened. A few seconds of complete silence, both on the image and around me. And the strangest part, I couldn't hear anything from outside. No footsteps, no presence. I stood there looking at the screen and then at the actual door, trying to sync the two in my head. If that person was right outside, I should hear something. Even the slightest movement, a shift of weight, but there was nothing. The silence was absolute. I started to feel that strange sensation that what I was seeing on the camera wasn't happening in the same time as me, as if there was a delay, or even a lead. Then the image on the camera changed again. The person took a step forward, getting even closer to the door, almost touching it. I automatically looked at the reel handle, expecting to see movement. Nothing. I looked back at the screen, and for a second I had the impression they were looking directly at the camera. I couldn't see the face clearly, but the position of the head changed in a way that felt aware, as if they knew I was watching. I kept staring without moving, trying to decide whether to open the door or just stay there waiting. But honestly, I had no intention of opening it. It felt like any wrong decision at that moment could make things worse. I kept my eyes on the camera, and then the image glitched for a second, a quick cut. When it came back, the person wasn't exactly in the same position. They were slightly closer in the frame, as if they had advanced without me seeing the movement. At that point, I stopped fully trusting the images. I took a step back inside the room, keeping my distance from the door. That's when the sensor system registered a new alert, this time indicating movement exactly in the control room area. Not in the corridor before, but right where I was. That made me freeze instantly. I looked at the camera inside the room, and there was no one there besides me. I stared at that internal monitor for a few seconds, trying to understand how the sensor could detect movement inside without showing anything on the image. I even moved slightly on purpose, just to see the system's response. It reacted to my movement normally, as it should, but the previous alert was still there, as if it had detected something besides me. I looked again at the corridor camera, and the person was no longer there. The space in front of the door was empty. That's when I felt the strongest shift. It wasn't a specific noise or a visible movement. It was more like a physical awareness that someone was in the same room as me. The air felt heavier, like it was hard to even breathe normally. I stood completely still, trying to listen for anything different. And then, very faintly, I heard a sound coming from inside the room. Not from the door, not from the corridor. From inside. I slowly turned my head, trying to locate where it was coming from. It was very subtle, almost like something lightly dragging or a quick touch on a smooth surface. Nothing I could immediately identify. The control room isn't big, basically a desk with monitors, some shelves, and the system panel. There's not much space for anyone to hide. Still, at that moment, it felt like the room had changed, as if I wasn't alone there anymore. I didn't move for a few seconds, just listening. The sound didn't repeat. The silence returned, but it didn't feel normal. I looked back at the cameras, trying to convince myself that it was over. There was no one in the corridors anymore, no sensors going off. Everything looked normal. But that feeling didn't go away. I stayed there until the end of the shift without leaving the room. When the day staff arrived, I explained what had happened. No one found any sign of intrusion, no system failure.
Thank you very much for your company until the end. Your support is what gives life to this channel. If these stories have caught you, don't forget to leave your like and comment on your opinion. And if you are not yet part of our community, sign up now to receive the next real horror stories.